Today's talk will be on chapter 11 on the dynamics of groups. What actually makes a group? Down there is an old picture of the Democratic National Convention, I believe. It's an interesting question. If you think about the groups you've been in, what identifies that? We have to start looking at factors that really define what it means to be in a group. Part of it is common social identity, that we're a group. So if you're like on a basketball team, we're a group, and as a group you want to win, and you're having to rely on one another. You have to listen to one another. You have to pay attention to one another and know how each other works, and you identify with that group. So when it comes to what makes a group, a common social identity, and actually there's a word called entitivity, which basically means we are a group. Look it up. It's in your chapter. In addition, we have things in common. So we're similar in terms of our beliefs, our values, our practices, our goals, how we do things. So that's a factor that also identifies a group. You have to have interaction. Interaction is fairly common in a group. So if you have a group of people on an elevator who get on, don't talk to anyone, and going up, would you say that's a group? Probably not, because they're probably not interacting. They don't have anything in common except going up or down. They don't identify with the group. But imagine if the elevator gets stuck. What happens then? Then those 4 or 5 people on an elevator will likely end up being identified by being a group, having to interact, having a common goal, trying to communicate closely with one another, depending on each other. Interdependence is a key factor. Communication is big, and there are some shared ideas about what is the appropriate way to behave. Actually, group structure is another way of thinking about the norms or unspoken rules for how we're supposed to behave in interacting with one another. It also doesn't hurt to have an identifiable outgroup. So like with sports teams, you're competing against another group. So the presence of an outgroup often helps solidify and make more cohesive members of an identifiable group. I mean, I know this is a long time ago now, but when 9/11 first happened, people in the U.S. became more identifiable as Americans because there was a identified outgroup, a threat from another place. Let's see, so groups, what are the good things about groups and what are the bad things about groups? We'll get to the good things in a minute, but what are some bad things about groups? If you think about it, we have some problems with conformity, which we just talked about in the previous chapter. No, that was two chapters ago. And then diffusion of responsibility, you remember that from the altruism chapter, that basically a pro-social behavior that it's not on me, it's on you. So when we're working in groups, and if I'm not wanting to do my part, or if I kind of want to slack a little bit, I can just hope that someone else will pick up that slack. That's actually part of social loafing, which I'll get into more detail in a little bit. Sometimes groups do stupid stuff, sometimes based on informational influence, another term we've talked about, sometimes because of normative influence, like this is what we're doing now. And some of these other terms, groupthink and group polarization, we'll get to by the end of this presentation. As a therapist, I have worked conducting group therapy many times. There have been volumes written on what makes a good group therapeutic. One is that there's cohesiveness among the members of a group. And you know, one of the powers in group therapy, being an individual therapist, when I'm talking one-on-one with someone, that's one thing. And a client that I'm working with can say like, oh, my therapist told me this. But if I'm conducting a group and you're the client and you have one other person in the group saying, you know, when you said that, that really pissed me off. And person 2 says it, and person 3 says it, and person 4 says it, and person 5 says it. That's hard for you to discount. The power in numbers of people saying, look, when you act that way, you rub people the wrong way. There's an enormous amount of power in that. When you're the client and you're hearing from just your therapist, it's like, you know, that might be seen as kind of aversive to other people. You go, that's just one therapist. But you have 5, 6 other people saying like, that's annoying. That's hard to discount. So that's one of the things I love about group therapy. If the groups start to cohere, a lot of times there's some understanding that there's individual diversity, obviously, among the members, but that there is some universality in terms of being human and the commonality in suffering that is so frequent. And if there's a theme for the group, like substance abuse or eating disorders or trauma history, that helps to really pull out some of the universality that you see. That means that we're all in the same universe, basically. Sharing information with one another happens. That's really good for like sharing healthy coping strategies. Learning norms for how to behave with others. Helping, giving, and receiving care, empathy. Observational learning is surprisingly a big factor. So if someone discloses in the group and they receive a lot of support and a lot of understanding, and that helps them through their difficult time, other people who have always been like really closed off and are scared to trust others can learn using observational learning. It's like, oh, if I do kind of open myself up a little bit, it might be worth it to connect with someone else. Catharsis, which we said in the aggression chapter, is not a good thing, but it can be a good thing emotionally in terms of like being able to process, especially some trauma reactions that people might have. And transference is not a term I want to get into at this moment. What do groups accomplish? Several things. They provide safety. When we're in a group, I mean, if you just go back to cave people days, being in a group improved your survival chances a lot, especially when there were animal predators out there. Well, even when there are other human predators, you got warring factions. You share food techniques. You can say, you're going to hunt, you're going to gather, you're going to cook, you're going to like go harvest the crops. I mean, whatever, it's all sharing responsibilities too. So again, I put up here tasks, I'm looking at my screen, tasks that a single person can't do. Can't have a single person build a pyramid very easily. That takes, obviously, teams and teams and teams of people. Another factor that's important about groups is observe information in history, which can really help an organization function well. Recently in Lincoln, we lost 3 key office assistants who'd been here for over 20 years. So also a common term used, secretary. But the amount of just historical information, they call institutional memory, that those 3 people carried with them. Everyone knew their phone numbers and everyone called them all the time. That was powerful because like, this is how you get things done. It's the informal structure within a group that can actually help you tremendously. Sometimes that's even more important than the formal structure of the group. Yeah, but I mean, when you lose members that have been with an organization for a long time, then you do lose some of that information in history, and that can lead to a downfall of an organization. Also, when you have groups, that allows people to specialize in things. It's like, okay, I'm going to concentrate on this while you concentrate on that, and people can get better. I'm spending long. These are the stages of group development. So I always think about this in terms of even group therapy tasks, that there's the first, the meet and greet, the form and relationship development. But then, I mean, if we do groups in a class and I give an assignment, and I am not very specific about the exact directions, stage 2 is definitely going to be storming and conflict about how you're going to accomplish the task. Because one of the people in your group, you got a group of 6, say, I want to be the leader here. And another one says, I'm not listening to you. That's where storming and conflict come into play. That it's basically it's trying to figure out what are the set of rules, the group structure we can agree to, the appropriate behaviors, who's going to lead, who's going to follow, who's going to do the different tasks. Once that gets settled out, then you can come up with performance. You can come up with like, okay, now we're supporting the norms that we've established and we're actually getting small tasks accomplished until the very end when you complete the group. That second stage, storming and conflict, some people have compared that to like being an adolescence in the development across the human lifespan, because that's where a lot of the arguing and just trying to figure out what in the world's going on happens. Groups, you weigh the costs and benefits of having diversity in a group. And there are a lot of benefits. There's a lot more flexibility and creativity. People come from different backgrounds and can share a perspective that other people may not have ever been exposed to. They can be smarter than an individual if people contribute and feel safe to like describe, here's my input on this, and errors can cancel each other out. However, another issue is that there are some downsides, typically related to misunderstandings that may happen because of different people's background. Even the way something is communicated, like someone just may misinterpret that as being said in a nasty way. It's like, I'm just being matter of fact, that's how I do things. But if there is a lot of diversity in the groups and someone else's background doesn't include a blunt way of communicating, they may take offense. So in more diverse groups, you can have more misunderstandings, which can lead to underperformance and some resentment and frustration. There are a few terms that are specific to group theory and development, which I want to talk about. Social facilitation is the idea that the presence of others can enhance the dominant response that a person has. It used to be thought that it only made people better, but we know now that the presence of others actually enhances the dominant response. So if you're good at something and other people are present, you're going to do better. You're going to perform better if others are present. If you're really bad at something and others are present, you're going to do worse at it. That's what social facilitation is about. It increases the odds of the dominant response occurring. Actually, I like that in terms of pool. In shooting pool, if you ever played billiards, I have this on the screen here. If you look, actually 300 studies with over 25,000 people show this happens. If you're really good at pool and if you're alone, you get about 71% accuracy. But if you have other people's present, your accuracy goes up. Do you remember this in the history of social psychology, that social facilitation was the very first social psych study done for the social psych books? But if you're really poor in billiards, if you're really poor at pool, and you get about 36% accuracy in terms of getting in the hole, if other people are present, you're going to get worse. They're going to be too distracting, and it's going to actually get in the way of your performance. They've shown this kind of social facilitation happen with all sorts of things. I put some examples. There's jogging, lifting weights. Some say it's just the mere presence. Others say it's like evaluation kind of apprehension that can be a factor. Because when you blindfold the others that are present, you don't really see the social facilitation that happens. Some say it's a distracting factor, but it's a term I'd like you to be familiar with. The flip side of that is really social loafing. Like typically getting better at something. If we're in a group and we think like, oh, I can't be readily identified, you have that almost diffusion of responsibility basically, and you will tend to perform less well. Because you think like, why do I have to work so hard when there's 6 of us here? They've done this in tug of war, actually, where they told people, they put headphones on them and blindfolds on them and said, pull on this rope. And they'll tell people you have 2, 3, 4 others behind you. And you see 1 in 5, actually the CL study. But the person who's in the study doesn't know it. There's nobody behind them. And the rope that they're pulling on is actually attached to a meter, which measures the amount of strength they apply to pulling on the rope in the tug of war. When they're alone, they give a lot more of their effort and strength. If they think more people are behind them, it just goes down with the more people they think that are behind them. This is social loafing. But you probably know social loafing in terms of being like in a group in a class, and someone thinks like, oh, how are they going to identify me that I didn't do my part? How many of you like to brainstorm things? I have to admit, a lot of times I use this in my classes. People who say, oh, okay, I want to come up with as many ideas in a short amount of time as possible. People often enjoy that. It's just like, because typically the instructions are, don't try to filter yourself out, let the ideas flow. And that's just fun. You get people rate it as being more creative and more successful. The problem is that brainstorming in groups that results in fewer ideas than if I ask everyone in the class to brainstorm individually and then contribute their ideas. So brainstorming in a group typically is not effective, but you could modify the brainstorming assignment by doing just as I said, asking people to come up with their ideas individually and then get into groups and work on it. There's a number of different ways you can do it, and your book talks about that. This idea of groupthink is reality testing and judgment suffer when harmony is the key. I put here, the picture of G.W. Bush. I don't know if you remember, after 9/11, the decision was made to attack Iraq, obviously. But there was no evidence that they had weapons of mass destruction there. The U.S. was just looking for a revenge target. And it's like, in history, it kind of looks back on that and it's like, well, what were the ideas behind that? Yeah, Saddam Hussein may have been a horrific leader. But when you look at the decision that was made and the cabinet, the team that was asked for their input, you had this situation. It's not just that. I mean, it also happened under like the Democratic President John F. Kennedy, and like, it happens in a lot of groups, where it's basically you get group members and they're looking for harmony, and they're isolated from outside perspectives, so they're suspicious of anybody who's coming in with outside perspectives. There's not much information exchange because it's a close-knit group. Actually, this is important. Typically, in groupthink, people who start to disagree are punished. I mean, they're treated poorly. If there's a high emphasis on conformity and cohesiveness, you're not going to come up with the best solutions, the best conclusions, the best ideas. If you have a directive, strong leader, and then they have everybody else that's strongly identifying with the group, that leads to groupthink too. And especially if the group thinks it's superior to other people, they're going to think we're doing the right thing. We know we are. So the groupthink can be a dangerous thing. Another factor kind of related to this is something called group polarization. There's a nice picture of the North Pole being lit up by the Northern Lights, because the poles, the North Pole, South Pole, those are extremes. And that's what group polarization is about. Having a group in their opinions getting more and more extreme. And that's what I put here. Group polarization is an exaggeration of individual group members' position or attitudes after talking with one another. So I've not seen politically in the years that I've been alive more polarization has happened between like Trump supporters and Trump haters. I mean, that I've never seen this kind of polarization ever. And typically what you are seeing is that people in society are getting more and more isolated from one another. There's less interaction. And so you get, I put down here, why does this happen? I mean, your meta-analysis of 21 studies show that there's informational influence and normative influence, just like we always have. We're getting information and we're watching each other, trying to learn this is the appropriate response to this. But also there's confirmation bias. It's like, oh yeah, this is the way I believe, and you said that, yeah, that confirms what I believe. And if I'm only surrounding myself with people who start off with the same biases and the same ideas that I have, it's just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. One way to get in the way of that is to assign someone to be a devil's advocate, to come up with all the counterpoints for what you're saying. I think this is an important way to actually live a political life. I think it's critical to examine it, no matter which way you lean, conservative, liberal, left, right, whatever, to listen to the media sources from the outlets that typically you don't agree with. Understand what they're saying, listen to it, and give it real thought, because there's obviously a belief that some things in the approach have merit or value. So listening and really trying to get, so you can weigh your own bias and realize that may be something I need to think about. Critical thinking involves regularly analyzing your own thought processes. And if you're not doing it, you're not critically thinking. All right, I put here, bottom line, groups are not as effective as they think they are. Some tips for improvement: keep group size about 4 to 5 people. That's the best, that's the most productive. Have plenty of time to discuss and accomplish tasks. That's also another factor. I always assign a devil's advocate, coming up like, what are you not thinking about? What are you not thinking about? Also, I like this in terms of the diversity of your groups. Whose voice is not being heard? Whose like stakes in the outcomes are not being considered? Who's not here? Why is that true? Whose voices aren't being heard? All these things are important. The devil's advocate can really help a group identify, like, oh yeah, we need to think about all the shareholders, all the stakeholders in this group's decision. Leaders should not make opinion known from the start. I like that idea. Leaders should also draw out members as much as they can. Like, let me hear what you're thinking, because there are shy people in groups. Let me hear what you're thinking. Let me hear what you're thinking. Let me hear what you're thinking. Also, having the group be as specific and concrete in their goals as possible is going to help that group get things done. That's all I have for group theory. This has been a 20-minute video, and we have 2 more chapters left in the book. Let's see if there's any other. There's a couple other terms that you might want to pay attention to. One is conjunctive performance, and that's when a group performance is determined by its worst member. Also process gain. Please read about that in your book as well.